Hello, everybody, and welcome to week 4 of the Journey to Accreditation. Today, we are talking about Standard 3. If you have been liking these videos, that's fantastic. Please like and subscribe so then you're able to get more of the videos as they're posted up. Today, we only have one person in the group at the moment. I'm sure some others will come and join us a little bit later. For those that are not familiar, I will simply be doing a PowerPoint where I'll be explaining the evidence that you can collect and also how you might write the annotations. I'll also show you some evidence of my own and what I use to be able to do it. Without further ado, let us begin. Okay. I just need to confirm with Chloe, are you able to see the current PowerPoint presentation I've just put up? Perfect. Okay, so this is Standard 3. So for today, what we'll be doing is reviewing Standard 3, the evidence that you can use, strategies for collecting evidence, an evidence example from my own proficient report. We'll talk about annotations and then talking about annotation examples, and I'll again show them from my report, and then there'll be a question and answer session at the end. Standard 3 is a little bit more complex than 1 and 2 in a certain way because we're now talking about planning. Okay, so Standard 3 is about how you plan for and implement effective teaching and learning. As teachers, we have to adapt and adjust to the students that we have. This is a little bit different from just simply saying differentiation is key and that's all we need to focus on. You need to be able to actually show in your planning that you are actually thinking about the strategies you want to implement. So let's just quickly go through some of those standards and what they mean. So standard 3.1.2 is that you are setting explicit, challenging, and achievable goals for all of your students. So what this means is that you're not saying, okay, I'm going to create a lesson plan where my 20 to 30 students are all going to get the same teaching strategy. You're actually saying, no, I need to set an explicit challenging goal and I need to actually say in my plan or say in some way how I was able to have the students meet that goal. 3.2.2, plan and implement well-structured learning and teaching programs or lesson sequences that engage students and promote learning. This is really about scaffolding. So it's something where you can show, we do this, we do that, and if we do this and we do that, we will get this outcome. It's being able to show a logic. When you're talking about implementing well-structured learning and teaching programs, for the report, you don't have to upload, a program that's 30 pages long with, explicitly detailed instructions on how you will get certain goals achieved. But it's just about being able to show the logic. What's the logic of you as a teacher in planning and implementing these things? 3.3.2, select and use relevant teaching strategies to develop knowledge, skills, problem solving, and critical and creative thinking. So this is basically where they're saying that your teaching should be as diverse as the students that you have, whether that's ESL students, whether that is students with the independent learning program, whether that's students that are visual, whether that's students that have learning difficulties. You want to be able to show that you are responding to all of their needs. Now, this can be very hard because as teachers, we are having more and more students with more and more complex needs. But if you're able to say, hey, look, I've got certain students that have different learning behaviors. So this is how I'm going to strategize and this is how I'm going to plan to account for that while making sure that all the other students are getting the equal amount of attention. We just got somebody joining our group now. Hello, Lena. We've just gone a little bit ahead. We're just reading through the standards now. And now we're on to 3.4.2. If you missed anything out, I'll have a video of the recording for the first couple of minutes of this video. 3.4.2, select and or create and use a range of resources, including ICT, to engage students in their learning. This does not necessarily mean that you only have to choose computer or programs to be able to show a creative use of resources. There are things you can do with, everyday household items that you might be able to do a science experiment, or to do a history lesson, or to be able to do something with maths. Anything that can show that you have come up with a creative way to be able to express a learning goal and how students are able to achieve it. This is where you can say, okay, I came up with an idea and it really, really worked. And you take some photos and then you can explain that as your evidence. Otherwise, you might buy a resource that has been pre-made. When you do buy something that is pre-made, so that's through Teachers Pay Teachers or Twinkle or something like that, it's fine. You can add it as part of your evidence. You just need to make sure that you are crediting where it came from and you are showing that it met the outcome that you were planned for in that lesson. It must be your own work, but you can also show that you incorporated a resource into your own work to get an outcome. 3.5.2, effective use of verbal and non-verbal communication strategies to support students' understanding, participation, engagement, and achievement. This is obviously very difficult to write because especially non-verbal communication is very difficult to actually write down and say, you use eye contact, you use facial expression, you use your hands. This descriptor can easily be covered if you do it in an observation. So then you're able to say to whoever's observing you, this is the descriptor I'm planning to use. Please watch me how I'm communicating in, verbally and non-verbally with my students. 3.6.2, evaluate personal teaching and learning programs using evidence, including feedback from students and student assessment data to inform planning. Basically, this is something where you are reflecting and you are also taking the feedback of the students into account. It's very easy to say that students do not have criticisms of their learning, or that they may not have criticisms of, you as the teacher or the resources that are being used or something like that. If they do have a criticism or feedback, you can use that as part of your planning as a teacher. I know for myself personally that I've used some videos in some lessons I've done, which really, even though they had the content that the students had to learn, the students did not engage with it. And when they told me why, I was able to actually plan for it next time and say, well, I'm not going to use that video because the students were unable to really engage with it, and I need to find something else that can help me meet that learning outcome. So when you plan for it, you could also make a note to say, as per student feedback, this has happened. And then finally, 3.7.2, plan for appropriate and contextually relevant opportunities for parents, carers to be involved in their children's learning. This is where you can use parent-teacher night or parent correspondence, or those conversations you might have with a parent at the gate. Pre-COVID, we were all having conversations with parents at the gate, where they might hint or say something that they've noticed about their child in terms of their learning, and you incorporate that feedback as part of your learning. Google Classroom correspondence is a question from Chloe. Yes, you can do Google Classroom correspondence. That's absolutely completely fine. Just something that showed the collaborative approach and that you were taking that collaborative approach on board and then planning for it into the future. So for instance, if you have students that are saying, I really can't do Zoom lessons, I can only sit for 5 minutes and then I get bored out of my mind. You plan for it and you go, okay, well, my Zoom lesson for these students are going to have to be shorter videos. So I might pre-record a video that's shorter for say 5 minutes, and then I might assign a task. And then once they've completed that task, they will then do another short video, so forth, that you are planning and you are creating a resource for it. That's just an idea. Okay. Evidences. Now, this time in comparison to the previous evidences that you can use, a lot of this is more about you. It's about you and your ability to be organized and your ability to plan. So a lot of this will be, a lot of these evidences will be mostly about understanding how you think. I like to say to a colleague of mine, I don't understand how your desk looks like a war zone, but somehow your lessons are always explicitly, perfectly completed. And he said, well, if you ask me to find something, I'll find it for you, but I'm not an organized person. The way it has to go with presenting evidence is that you have to show your organization. And we'll talk about that just now. So some of the types of evidences you can use: lesson or day plan analysis or reflection, which articulate explicit, challenging, and achievable learning goals for all students in the lesson. This is where you are reflecting. And what you might do is you might have a lesson plan. If things go wrong in the lesson and you've got a lesson plan, write it down. That becomes evidence, where you say, this didn't work, or that didn't work, or I had this issue here. If you write that down, that means you are reflecting, and that can be used as evidence. You can use student work samples that are linked to the lesson plan to demonstrate the link between goal set, assessment, and student learning. So you can put up a lesson plan where you say, this is the objective of the lesson. This is where we wanted to go. Here's some student work showing that they were able to do it. So two pieces of evidence that go side by side. Another piece of evidence that you can use is lesson evaluation notes, where the teacher evaluates a lesson based on the level of achievement of goals. Lessons can sometimes go unexpectedly, and it's always good to be able to reflect on that. So for instance, if you had certain goals and you were like, okay, I've got 3 goals I want students to be able to do today. If students can't get past goal number 1, or they can't get past goal number 2, on that lesson plan, you should be able to write down and actually analyze, have a think and go, why is it that this goal wasn't achieved? Was it a time management issue? Was it a classroom management issue? Was it that the work was too challenging? Was it that I hadn't explained the task correctly? Was it that I hadn't taught the content in a way that the students had a way to be able to do the work? So your evaluation of your lessons is a great piece of evidence to do, and it's also good for your own reflection, because then you become a better teacher by reflection. Student work samples that are linked to the sequence of lesson plans and/or teaching and learning programs to demonstrate the link between goal set, assessment, and student learning. So basically, you might want to be able to look at student work, and you might say, we're doing math, for example, and I want to show students at the beginning of the unit, and then I want to show student work at the end of the unit. And you might be able to have that in a form of data to be able to say students were at X level at the beginning of the unit. I can demonstratively show that students achieved Y level by the end of the unit. And that's a piece of evidence that you can use. Another piece is lesson evaluation notes, where the teacher evaluates a lesson based on the level of achievement of goals. That's a repeat from last time, sorry. Lesson and/or day plans that display flexibility, logic, sequencing, and variety in activities and resources. Sometimes we have to recognize that students' attention is limited. It does not mean that attention cannot be redirected into the learning goal. You just have to think about the activities that you're using. So if you have a video, and then you say, all right, from the video, we're going to go to a worksheet. Then from the worksheet, we're going to go into a personal reflection, or from the worksheet, we're going to go into another activity. So long as you're able to show that you're looking at it as, that you're being flexible with your lesson plans. You're saying, you know what, not everything is going to be sit down, watch the video, do the worksheet, we're done. It's being able to say, you know what, we need to be flexible, we need to be logical, but we also need to be showing a way in which we can say, you know, everything is going to make sense by the end. If you can look at the whole of it will work. You might be able to present homework tasks that are relevant to the lesson assessment items that measure student outcomes, the student achievement of stated outcomes. Homework's an interesting one. You would have to find a piece of evidence that is showing your consistency in assigning homework. So what that means is that you're saying, you know, as part of my lesson plan, I plan for homework to be done. And if I plan for homework to be done, I also plan to mark that homework or to find some way for that homework to be accountable or to find some way for that homework to lead into an assessment or some way in which I can measure that it's being done. Too often when we think about homework, we think about homework as being the leftover work, where we go, okay, we weren't able to achieve what we needed to in this lesson, finish it off for homework. That might sound good as a sort of a short-term idea where you're just like, yep, you know, didn't finish this, the rest is homework. But as teachers, we need to actually think about homework as part of our lesson plan, where we are saying the homework will actually be something you review and something you do at home, and it will be linked to the lesson, but it will also be a sort of a separate element to their learning. So that way you can say, yes, you need to finish the rest of this classwork at home. You also have homework that you need to do. If you're able to show some way in which you have structured that in your learning programs, and to be able to say that you have a way to check it or to collect the evidence of that, that is a really good piece of information. And it'll also demonstrate that you're able to plan, not just for the lesson that you're going to teach, but you're planning for the future. Another piece of evidence is lesson and or day plans which show a variety of teaching and learning activities, such as problem solving, critical thinking, and creative thinking that link syllabus objectives and outcomes. Kids are going to get bored. Students are going to get bored. Teachers are going to get bored. You want to be able to show something where you have gone, you know what? I want to have something that is, you know, deep thinking at one point. Then I want to do something like give everyone a bit of a brain break. But if whatever I'm doing is going to be a brain break, it's going to link to what the lesson objective is. So then the kids can have a break, but they're still engaged with the lesson and they're still engaged with what the goal of that lesson is. Another thing to think about is lesson and or day plans, which show a variety of teaching and learning activities, including debate, hands-on activities, role-playing, practical activities, frequent opportunities for skills practice, relevant projects, site studies, and excursions. That's quite a meaty list. But again, it's showing that you are planning for a variety of strategies to be used. If you have a strategy that you've never used before, and you're thinking, you know what, I need to make a piece of evidence. I have a challenge where I've got a really dry subject, or I've got something that might be particularly difficult, that you actually plan for activities to be done, and you can experiment and see which ones work. The good thing is that if you experiment with activities in a lesson and it fails, you can still use that as evidence, as long as you are reflecting on why it failed. And it might be good for your supervisor to see that, to be able to say, you plan for certain activities, some of them didn't work, you're reflecting on it. You plan for it, you're reflecting on it. That's a great mark of a teacher. Right. Another one is teacher written reflection on choice and effectiveness of chosen strategies. This is really good if you have a diary, a personal diary, or a professional log where you are writing notes to yourself, where you're just reflecting on the strategies you used as a teacher. I reflect on my strategies and I go, some things work for some classes, some don't for others. And I just make a note for myself when I'm planning, whether that's for the beginning of the unit or whether that's whether I'm getting a new class. I look at the role list and I'm like, okay, I've had these kids before. I know how to plan for it. I know what strategies will work. You You can also use student work samples which show how the teacher has promoted self-directed work, such as research tasks, essay writing, or any other self-directed work in which the students have to do their own work, or they have to find their own way around a task. You can also do lesson or day plans, which show that the teacher has used curriculum support materials and designed resources effectively to enable students to access their curriculum. That's pretty self-explanatory. You're looking at support materials. What are you using? What are you planning to use? Why are you planning to use it? The why is very important. If you're going to use it as evidence, you need to explain why. Why do this? Why do this over that? You know, if you're able to link it to one of the other standards, know your students and how they learn, then that's a really good link. You're able to say, this is why I'm using this. This is how it's going to work. I'm confident in my choices. Another one is lesson plans, analysis, and reflections that show how the teacher has mapped resources using ICT as students' learning needs. This might be something as simple as having a program or having a scope and sequence where you are saying in a certain period of the course, students will be using ICT, whether there's computer or iPads, to check knowledge, to do a research task, or something where you are actually saying, I have resources planned in my schedule to be able to link prior learning, get the learning goal of that lesson done today, and have that used in the future. You might have lesson or day plans which show the use of advanced organizers such as concept maps and visual learning aids. So you might actually go, okay, I have a class that are really good, but they need a lot of visual aids. So what am I going to use and how am I going to use it? Concept maps, do I have a class that's really struggling with creative writing, for example? I might help them do some concept maps to be able to get their head around an idea or to help them plan around an idea. You might have lesson observation of the teacher using effective questioning and or discussion techniques, including a variety of questions at appropriate levels, and encourage risk-taking and prepare students for discussion. So this is a really good point if you want to have it as an observation where you say to your supervisor, watch me as I'm talking to my students, watch me as I'm questioning my students, watch me as I'm trying to encourage my students to take a risk and to go a little bit further. And something really simple for that might be, your students, that there are some students that are usually very shy about putting their hand up and volunteering. They might know the information, but they may feel shy about talking in front of their peers. If you can be able to show classroom management, to be able to say, I'm going to invite the student to come up, or I'm going to ask the student to provide their opinion, or ask questions, to be able to show that you are really planning for the kind of questions you're going to ask and how those questions lead into the lesson goal, which is a really interesting point because we don't actually plan our questions as much as we think we do. We might just think, okay, in the moment, I'm going to ask a question based on whatever variable is bringing that up. But if in our lesson plan, we might have some driving questions that will really help nail a point. What question can I ask in my lesson plan to give to the kids that's going to really show them that I'm thinking about where they need to go? Food for thought. The slides continue. Okay, you can also have student work samples that demonstrate the teacher's effective communication strategies. Getting back onto what Chloe said about Google Classroom correspondence, this is really easy. If you have comments in a post that you put up, or your students are asking questions to you or talking to each other about a task or something, you can have that as a piece of evidence. Lesson observations which show that the teacher models, respects, and praises contributions. So this is where you might say in your lesson, hey, I have students that sometimes display aggressive or disrespectful behavior. Please watch me as I demonstrate how I manage that behavior. You might have an evaluation of your teaching and learning by your supervisor or by your someone at the school. where they might say, let's talk about your teaching and your learning. Let's see how it goes. That might be just in a form of handwritten notes. That might be in the form of a conversation followed up by an email. You can also present programs and or lessons based on evidence, including feedback from student assessment data to evaluate and improve teaching and learning scope and sequence and programs. Basically, if you are about to teach a course or you're about to teach a unit and you're able to access the data of that class that you're about to teach, and you can say, okay, the data from this class is showing that the students are here. I want the students to get there. All right, what evidence do I have in my planning to help students get from here to there? Evidence can also mean that you're having a conversation with your colleagues where you're saying, can I talk to you? You had this class last year or last term. The data is showing this. I plan to improve it. Where do you think the areas of improvement are? Do you mind if I write some notes? And then when you write those notes, that actually counts as evidence. You can also provide emails, letters, or other records of individualized communications between teacher and parents to encourage parents to be involved in school and or classroom activities. This doesn't always need to be negative. So what you can do is if you have correspondence with parents or with carers that shows achievement or that shows something positive or something that reinforces the learning that's happening at the class with what's happening at home, you're more than welcome to use that. It doesn't necessarily always need to be negative, but it should always show your professionalism that in that correspondence, you are accounting that correspondence as part of your planning. So then you might have a few emails which demonstrate an issue that was raised by a carer or parent. You've received it. You've spoken about how you're going to try and achieve it, fix that issue. The parent and or carer is able to say that there is an improvement in that issue, and then the issue is resolved. But you don't want to be presenting evidence where it's like, an email chain that goes on 50, 60 emails back and forth, because no one's got time to read that. You want to have something that shows a concise communication and an outcome. You might have lesson plans or lesson observation, which shows how parents' skills, knowledge, and expertise have been used in accordance with school protocols to enhance teaching and learning programs. So this will be with some parents that might have students that have an individual learning plan, students that are ESL, students that have behavioral issues, and it's that correspondence where a partnership has been formed between the school, the home, and you as the teacher and the student. So then, you're able to demonstrate a lesson plan where you've said, I have X student's mother, father, carer has mentioned that this topic might be difficult for the student, or the student had there's cultural sensitivities around this issue, or that there are things where the student will not be very strong at. Could be also things where the parent might say, I'm not very good with helping my student at home for homework. So you might say, the homework that I give the student for today is not going to be homework that will require assistance because that correspondence is there. You might also have an interview plan and a discussion for parent, carers, and teacher interviews. So you might say, if I'm going to call home, I have some questions. You might write what those questions down and then write what the answers are. I'm going to call a parent or I'm going to email a parent. I have questions. I want answers. From those answers, I'm going to develop a plan. I'm going to develop an action. Okay. Whew, that was all the evidences. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of it. I'm going to have a drink of water while I just ask Chloe and Lena if they have any questions. Chloe, last week we talked about one evidence to me standard one and standard two descriptors from the same standard or different standard. Okay, so a recap. When you are collecting your evidence, you want to be able to have one evidence to one standard and the descriptors from that standard. Okay. So the way it works is you're going, all right, for standard one, I've got one piece of evidence and I'm going to pick descriptors from standard one. Then for standard two, you're going to say, okay, for standard two, I have my piece of evidence. I'm doing standard two. I'm going to pick my descriptors from standard two. So then for this week, you will say, okay, for this week, I'm finding evidence for standard three. I'm going to pick my descriptors from standard three. And I've got my evidence for standard three. I'm going to pick my descriptors from standard three. Does that make sense? I know that might sound a little bit confusing. Again, you don't have to do it my way. Sorry, please recap. Okay, all right. Let me see if I can, maybe if I draw it or write it down, it might be a little bit easier. Give me a second. Can you see my video of me, by the way? Mind map? Okay, well, I'll say, can you see my video? Can you see me on your screen? Okay, all right. So this is how I did mine. Standard one. Hang on. Evidence one. Standard one. Sorry. Oh, hang on. Give me a second. Give me a second with that. Okay, give me just 1 second. Oh, that's not really working very well, is it? Okay, that is not working very well. Give me a second. Give me a second. We'll get there. So let me see if I can use some technology and some ingenuity and figure something out. Okay. Give me a second. Come on, technology. Get there eventually. Okay, let's see if this works. Let's see if I'm a technological genius or an idiot. Can you see that? Okay, so this is how I structured mine. You don't have to structure yours like this, but I found mine was the easiest like this. Evidence one, standard one, I get descriptors from the standard one. Evidence one is done. Evidence two, standard two, descriptors from standard two. Evidence 3, standard 3, descriptors from standard 3. And I did all of my evidences like that. Minimum was 2 descriptors per standard, correct. Minimum 2. Now you can do more descriptors if you want. Okay. Again, it depends on how you want to do your evidence. If you get remember, you only need a minimum of 5 evidences, but if you decide to do all 7, go ahead. If you have a really good piece of evidence, but you feel that you want to borrow from the different standards to be able to have it, by all means, go ahead. But the system only requires that you have at least covered every standard in your report. Does that make sense? Okay. So on that, with my one, what I did is I ended up doing 5 pieces of evidences. The reason why is because I counted my observation as 2 pieces of evidence. I'll explain that a little bit later. You don't need to submit 7. Okay. The minimum is 5. Okay, so a question from Lena. What happens if the evidence overlaps? Do we still need to mention all the standards that meet it? Now, here's the thing about evidence. You can use the same evidence multiple times if you need to. Okay. So for instance, let's say you have a lesson plan, and that lesson plan meets, let's say that meets everything from standard 3. Cool. What you can do after that is you might say, actually, with that lesson plan, I did some reflection on it. Okay, I ended up having to go back and review it or something. You can use that evidence again with fresh annotations explaining why you're using it again. Okay. If the evidence does overlap, meaning that you've got a piece of evidence that it comes from different standards, just put in where the descriptors from that standard. That's fine. Okay. The way that I structured it and the easiest way that I did it it's easier to work with just 7 descriptors from one standard for a piece of evidence, rather than go through all of them hunting and trying to work out which descriptor meets that evidence. So that's why I have this system. Again, you are welcome to have the evidence and then pick descriptors from all the standards if that's what you want to do. That's okay. So Chloe asks, so I can submit 5 evidence, but I need to show meets 7. Your observation report will count as the 6th piece of evidence. So you might have 5 pieces of evidence, but then the observation report will count as your 6th. And then there you go. My report, when I did my one, I counted here, I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry, I had 6 of mine, but I counted my observation report as I put my observation report twice. So I had that as my what was it? My supervisor lesson report, and then my yeah. I know it sounds complex. Much easier to just simply say, for every evidence that you have, pick a standard for it, pick the descriptors from that standard. I'm confusing myself now. I need water. Okay, let's move on. There's a question and answer session at the end, so we'll make sure we cover anything if you're still confused there. Again, evidence for collecting evidence, strategies for collecting evidence. As always, look to the work you've done. you'll likely have already made any evidence that you need to. If you haven't got it, go make it, implement it, use it as soon as possible. If you're booked at a school in advance, speak to the person you're relieving and ask if it's okay for you to plan the lesson. Even if you are out of that fit, even if it's out of your field, so you're math teaching English or your science teaching history, you can still use it as evidence. And standard 3 gives you quite a range of evidence to demonstrate how you plan and implement effective teaching and learning. There's a high reliance on lesson plans. However, if you feel that you have evidence that is a photo of the standard in action, use it. You do not have to use a lesson plan if you don't want. Again, this is a negotiation between you and your supervisor. If you're gung-ho about lesson plans and programming and all of that, and that's how you want to demonstrate your teaching, by all means, go ahead. But if you're in class and you happen to see something that you had planned for actually happening, and you grab your phone and you're like, I'm going to quickly just take a snap, provided that it doesn't break any privacy laws with the student's photo or anything, you can use that as evidence to say, hey, this thing I planned for actually happened and it worked. And then you can use it as evidence. Right. So I'm now going to show you my evidence of what I did for standard 3. Let me get there. Okay. Chloe, Lena, can you see the PDF? Okay. Let me see. Wait. Okay, give me a second. How's that? Is that a little bit better? Okay. All right. So for my evidence, I was thinking about planning. And what I did is I actually thought, okay, I have to do safety video as part of the workshop. Now, safety videos can be quite boring. You know, you watch the videos. Yes, they have, you know, they have a worksheet that goes with it. But as anyone will tell you, there is such a time as there is too much worksheet. Where you watch a video, you answer questions from the worksheet, you might get some questions from the teacher, lesson's over. So what I actually wanted to do is I wanted to have students to be doing things that would help them engage with the lesson a little bit more. So we watched I took a screenshot of the ClickView video that we all watched together. And then I was able to show the what the chapters of that video actually were. I then moved on and I took a photo of a lesson activity, which was that I wanted the students to be able to mix and match and work out where what the classroom rules should be like, in what order should they be. This was done with quite a lot of fun. The students were able to get together and they were able to actually talk and discuss and debate about which rules should be higher than another and how that all went. And then once we got to the 20, we were able to have a discussion and some students were able to realize that certain rules were probably placed in the wrong position, and then they had a debate about that. And then I finished it off with having the students to make posters, safety posters that we put up on the wall. Now I had planned this whole lesson out. I had a lesson plan in which I actually had to sequence some events that had to happen, and everything happened in the exact order that I wanted to. Now I could have put my lesson plan up as evidence enough and just said, here it is. I decided that I wanted to actually show students like what I was showing the students, the activity that the students were doing, and then to actually show something that the students actually made from that lesson at the end. As you can see, it's some very artistic students. were able to put up some posters, but this ended up going up on our wall and ended up being a great reminder throughout the year when students were probably going off task or doing something dangerous. I could point up to the wall and say, hey, remember when we did that poster, the safety poster? It looks like you're breaking this thing right now. So that's my evidence. As you can see, very simple, 2 photos and a screenshot. And that's all I felt that was necessary for standard 3. My supervisor thought the same as well. He was very happy with this, and he could see from my lesson plan how these images linked in. And then he said to me, you don't really need to submit your lesson plan. I don't think you're able to show how this works. And in my annotations, I explained it a little bit more in detail. Any questions? It's okay. Okay. It's okay to not be impressed by every piece of evidence that's given, just as long as your supervisor is able to say that it meets that standard. Okay, so let me just pop back over here. A brief thing about annotations. Remember that the purpose of each annotation is to explain how and why the selected evidences show that your teaching practice meets the descriptors. Annotations should provide context for the evidence in order to situate the work, such as the what, who, why, or when. Annotations should identify and explain how evidence meets a descriptor, and it should articulate the impact on student learning. Before we have a look at my annotation, annotations should provide sufficient detail so that the evidence can be understood by others outside of the teacher's context. Again, you should be writing it simply and easily that you can give it to somebody on the street and they understand what they're reading. Write your annotations in Microsoft Word or a writing program. This will make editing much easier. Especially the NESA ETAMS website sometimes glitches, so having that backup is very important. Keep the language simple, accessible, and professional. Annotations should only be between 300 and 500 words. The NESA website had a word limit, and your supervisor will be reading the annotations. Your TAA will have access to the annotations. With the annotations, do bear in mind that your supervisor has to read it. And more than that, they probably don't want to read incredibly wordy, complex annotations. So keep it simple, so then you're able to make your supervisor's life a little bit easier. Okay, I'm going to show a sample of my annotation. Okay, so let me just go back here. Okay, so can you see my annotations there? Good, okay. So I'll just read this out. These were for descriptors 3.2.2, 3.3.2, 3.4.2. Try to say that fast and you'll twist your tongue. The click-through video title, Safety in Technology Workshop, covers the range of topics students must consider to safely manage risk in the workshop. The video covered topics such as personal protective equipment, PPE, potential hazards, and potential behaviours that minimize risk. The video would be paused after each topic to demonstrate the PPE and allow students to touch and wear them, safety goggles and glasses, as well as practice moving around the room in a fashion displayed by the video. This demonstrates standard descriptors 3.2.2 and 3.4.2. Fun fact before I move on to the next one, I had the students stand up and I had them walk like zombies around the room so that they can demonstrate walking slowly but safely. After the students had completed the video and practice with the PPE, we then moved on to consolidating that knowledge with 2 interactive tasks. The first one was to discuss classroom rules and expectations. Students were then given the rules cut up into strips and had to guess in which order of importance they went in. This stimulated discussion in their groups about which risk and hazards should be at the top of the list. After each group had compiled their list, we will check together and discuss why each group compiled their list differently. Students then took their favorite rule and turned it into a poster. This demonstrated standard 3.3.2. So in the annotation, you can kind of see that I'm walking my supervisor through how that lesson went, the sequence of events as they happen. I did actually put in the zombie walk thing in my original notes, but my supervisor said that was probably inappropriate, so I took that out. But generally, this is what my annotation looked like. Simple, easy, explaining what happened and what I did and how it all came together. Any questions? Just confirming that I need to show that I meet the 7 standards for teachers. Okay. So what I will do is, okay, this is 3, okay. If we were to look at my report, okay, the one that I submitted, okay, let me just come back. I had evidence 1, evidence 2, evidence 3, evidence 5, evidence 4, evidence 5, evidence 6. So I had 6 pieces of evidences. My observation report counted as my 7th piece of evidence. Okay, I used my observation report for 7.1.2, 7.2.2. Now, this is where I won't say it was a trick, but this is how I was able to get for standard 4, is I actually put that in my annotation. So let me just, I used like different standards. So standard 3 and standard 4, I use some descriptors from there. And that way I was able to have standard 4 in my report without having to actually make evidence for standard 4, if that made sense. Now, to make your life a lot easier, the easier way to do it is that if you want to collect 7 pieces of evidence, you are by all means welcome to. Okay, if that's going to make it a little bit easier in your head to be able to have an order or a sequence of how many pieces of evidence you need, by all means, you can get 7. However, I would suggest that you get 6 pieces of evidence and use your observation as your 7th. Does that make sense? There we go. Okay. Again, with the evidence, it's good that you go out and collect them. It's good that you go out and make them, but the evidence collecting should not be stressful. You shouldn't be stressing about the evidence that you may or may not have. With making a report like the proficient report, your goal is to be able to get it all together simply and easily, have a file somewhere on your computer or your hard drive and just put them in bit by bit, day by day. And then when you are at, like, you've got a bit of time at work or you've got a bit of time at home, you just give yourself 20 minutes to a half hour, look at that evidence. Yeah, I might use that evidence, write an annotation for it, 300 to 500 words, you're done. The goal should be that you are actually planning your proficient report in conjunction with your supervisor, but you're planning it in a way that it is not stressful. For me, I put it all together once I had everything collected and all my annotations written up. It took me about an hour to upload it all on there, so I hit submit and then I was done. My supervisor looked at it, and over the course of 2 days, he wrote his report, he submitted it. My principal got it inside of 24 hours after my supervisor had sent it, and my supervisor approved it within 24 hours. So even though it took quite a lot of time for me to collect my evidence and put it all together, once I submitted it, it was very quick, and I went from graduate to proficient within 3 to 4 days. So when you are collecting your evidence, you should only be thinking about what you have, what you're using, and if it's working to your advantage. The other thing is about standard 3. Standard 3 is really about reflection. It's really about you. It's more about you being able to say, as a teacher, I am planning for, or I am thinking about not just the past, but the present, but I'm also thinking about the future. And if you can demonstrate that in the evidence that you pick for standard 3, you're pretty much going to have a lot from that piece of evidence that you can use in other elements as well. So if you have a lesson plan where you're planning ahead and you've included everything from standard 3, you can take elements from that plan and use it in different standards, different pieces of evidence as well. Most of my report takes up from Minecraft or my work in a woodshop, but there is a lot of overlap in evidence, but they're different standards, so that's okay. All right. One piece of evidence should be able to do multiple descriptors, if that makes sense. Like if you have one lesson plan, and then in that lesson plan you had an activity, and you're like, well, this is going to be for standard 3, but the activity that I use, I'm going to maybe use that in, I don't know, standard 2 or standard 4 or standard 5, because even though that evidence that I'm presenting for standard 3 is for standard 3, that activity or that resource or that thing that I use in that lesson, I'm going to use that in another standard. And from one lesson you could get 2 to 3 standards done in one go. Any more questions? All good. Okay. All right, so you guys know, if you have any questions, feel free to send me a message or write a comment down in the comments, and I will have this video posted up to our casual group later on this evening. Bye-bye, everyone. Recording will stop now. Bye.